Mr. Martin, are you ready for roll call?
We
Yeah.
are live.
Okay.
When I call the school district, please state your name so we can have that for the record to know if it's a representative or alternate, just so we go. Afton,
Kenny Edgar,
thank you. Bayless. Bayless. Brentwood.
Yeah, Ryan Flynn.
Clayton. Clayton. Ferguson Florison here. Kevin Martin. Hancock, please.
Yes. Yes, here, Jennifer Crossman.
Hazelwood.
Yes, Sylvester Taylor.
Thank you. Jennings. Jennings. Kirkwood. Kirkwood. Ledoux.
Keisha Lee.
Thank you. Lindbergh.
Jen Miller.
Thank you. Maple Richmond Heights.
Linda Robinson.
Thank you. Melville.
Patrick McKelvey.
Thank you. Normandy. Normandy. Parkway.
Here, Debbie Hopper.
Thank you. Pattonville.
Here, Jeannie Schotmuller.
Thank you. Rittner.
Here, Jennifer Lonis.
Thank you. Riverview Gardens.
Here, Veronica Morrow Real.
Thank you. Rockwood.
Here, Lynn Midget.
Thank you. University City.
Present, Joanne Suda.
Thank you. Valley Park.
Here, Jeremy Picker.
Thank you. Webster Groves.
Tara here.
Thank you. We have a quorum.
Yes, we have a quorum.
Rita, I'm struggling to see the agenda.
Mark, do you need me to pull up the agenda? There it goes. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we get an approval of the agenda for tonight's meeting?
This is Veronica Morrow Real, Riverview Gardens. I so move.
Second, Jen Miller Lindbergh.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Okay, next we'll move on with the approval of the minutes from our last meeting on June the 6th, 2022. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes?
Kenny Edgar, so moved to approve the minutes.
Second, Patrick McKelvey, Melville.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Anyone opposed?
Lynn Midget will abstain.
Okay. Thank you, Lynn.
You.
Next we are up to public speakers and public comment. Rita, do we have any?
None were submitted.
Okay. Next up is our Parent Advisory Council updates. Dr. Carter.
Me the opportunity to address the governing council. If we can have the PowerPoint pulled up, please. We would also like to thank everyone who came out and supported the PAC Family Engagement Night. It was a beautiful night, and we have submitted all the pictures to SSD so that they can put it out on their informational website as well as our Facebook page. Next page, please. I would like to introduce you to our 22-23 PAC Executive Committee. It's myself, Dr. Kamisha Carter, President, Rob Eden, Vice President, Melissa Upchurch, Recording Secretary, Denise Bursey, Correspondence Secretary, Latricia Clark, Educational Specialist, Parliamentarian. Our current agenda for the 22-23 school year. We have focus areas for the partnering districts. Basically, we spent the last year looking at the inner workings of SSD, and we now understand that SSD and the partnering district works hand in hand. But what's most interesting is that we are learning that parents are not engaging the partnering districts as they should, as our children are part of the partnering district first, and then a child who receives services for SSD. So over the summer, we came up with 4 global areas of concern. Next slide, please. With our global focus areas, we are addressing the challenges that families have shared with us over the summertime and during the last school year with the partnering districts. Next slide, please. As I stated earlier, there are 4 focus areas that we are looking at. Next slide. Our 4 areas are parent voice, equity in spacing, compliance, and equity in understanding the IEP SPED process. Next slide, please. Our first focus area is parent voice. The SSD PAC wants parents to have a voice not only during public comments, but also at the table where decisions are being made. When you guys are looking at new plans for buildings, when you are looking at a global view of your community that you serve, we're asking that you bring parents who have children who receive services from SSD, not just the ones that have little to no lack of who's not as differently able as someone who may be low incident, which those children may be deaf, they may be blind, they may be deaf and blind, they may be in a wheelchair, maybe they have medical access, they need a nurse 24 hours, so they have a nurse during the day. We want you to bring those parents as well up to the table so that they can have a say in how plans are being made. Oftentimes we just listen to, oftentimes we listen to architects and how they deal with architecture, but we never really deal with the actual parent. So we're asking that when you make those types of decisions, when you make decisions for the district, when you have parent community forums, please include those parents as well. Next slide, please. Equity and spacing. The SSD PAC is asking partnering districts to look at their spacing for their self-contained classrooms and classrooms that are inclusive. What we are learning is that across several districts, not 1 or 2 districts, but several districts, there is no equity in spacing. Oh, we need a classroom for another gen ed class, so we're going to take away spacing from this area or from these students. That's not equitable for our children. And putting all our children in one room or putting all our children in one sec of the building is not equitable. What it is against the law. And so we're asking that you work with us, work with SSD in order to make sure that our children are not being lumped together. They are not on top of each other because you need a classroom, because you have so many other children. Our children are just as important as other children. And our children have mandates, legal and binding documents called the Individual Education Plan that the school district must adhere to. And if the school district does not adhere to, and the parents are not happy.
You went on mute, Dr. Carter.
Sorry. So we're asking that you guys as partnering districts start looking at your spaces, start looking at your buildings, start looking at your classroom, even as board presidents and board members, go into the buildings, look at what the buildings look like unannounced, because we as parents are looking at that as well. Moving forward, one of our action items for equity and spacing, we have now an equity board with the SSD PAC, and we're going to be having checklists, providing parents with checklists in order for them to go into and be able to see, are their children getting the best quality education that is afforded to them in your district? Next slide, please. Making sure that students are placed in their least restrictive environment. This is all with area 2, focus area 2. Next. Ensuring classes are not being pushed together or eliminated due to spacing. Making sure that we all understand that this has become a problem for several partnering districts. Next slide, please. Parents want to be heard and discuss opportunities to ensure equity for all students and sustainable learning environments for all children. Next slide. Focus area 3. 1 second, baby. Okay. Focus area 3. SSD PAC is asking partner districts to hold up their end of the bargain when it comes to compliance and be partners. What do we mean by compliance? Making sure that the IEP is held up when our children enter your buildings. What we are finding is that is not so. Next slide, please. We're finding that equity of understanding and a partnership agreement that is signed every year. Someone on your school board is signing this partnership agreement stating line by line things that are needed to be accomplished when you are dealing with students who receive services from SSD. We are asking partner districts to understand the dual responsibility between both districts. It's not all on SSD. You guys have a responsibility as well. Next slide, please. We're also asking that partner districts show accountability and equity with our children who receive services from SSD. This is not just our wish, but this is a mandated federal law, Public Law 94-142. Next slide. Equity of understanding the IEP. As board members, you're asking yourself, what do I have to do with the IEP? I'm glad you asked. We're asking that school teams work with all students, especially those who receive services from SSD. You guys employ the superintendent. The superintendent is the leader of the district. If he or she is the leader of the district, then he or she must know what is going on in his or her school district. With that being said, he or she must know that the IEP is not being upheld in several ways. Next slide, please. Understanding that principals are more cognizant of building plans and plans for de-escalating and dysregulating students. Oftentimes, what we have found out that principals have no clue that the child is in the building, let alone that the child has a building plan. We're also often finding that every problem that comes up with our children is regulated back to the case manager, or the case manager has to deliver information, or the case manager has to offer suspension. We're still waiting for one particular case. We're still waiting on the school district to give us a copy of the suspension letter, and that was last year. So we're looking at these things and saying, hey, these are our children who attend school in your district, and they are being mistreated. Next. This includes more than the SSD teacher, just stated that, but the general education teacher, the assistant principal, the restorative practice person, the bus driver, the paraprofessional, the security guard, and everybody who plays a major role in that child's life while they're at the partnering district school. Next slide, please. It is imperative that we all become a part of each of these students' villages so that they can be successful in every facet of their life. This is no small feat, but it is able to happen. Next slide, please. Our ask: communicate, communicate, communicate. We as an SSD PAC are still reaching out to board presidents and superintendents to give them this exact same message. We are serious this year. We are asking you to communicate with us more than just a letter, more than just a dojo, more than just an email. We're asking for you to bring us to the table and have real rich conversation, robust conversations with us so that you'll know the needs of your community and your constituents. Also, we are asking for you to hear the need, see the need, collaborate with families about the need. Everybody doesn't need a USDA meal bag. Some parents just need for you to understand that their child has to walk through a door and because they can't roll their wheelchair in your building because they don't have equitable, adequate access to your building. We're asking you to talk to us. And I think that's the last slide. Any questions? Hearing and seeing none, Madam President, that ends my report.
I'm sorry. I had myself on mute. This is Veronica Morrow Real with Riverview Gardens.
Yes, ma'am.
That reminded me of when I got my start with SSD as a parent, some of those same types of issues. So I would really like to have a copy of that sent to me so that I can make sure it is shared at our buildings with all of our principals and administrative team.
Yes, ma'am. And if you would like for one of the executive committee members to come out and present this information, we are more than willing to.
Okay, you and I, we can email each other. I think I have the contact information.
Yes, ma'am. If not, Denise has my information because you guys connected on Wednesday night.
Right. Good.
Yes,
okay.
ma'am.
Mm-hmm. Are there any additional questions for Dr. Carter?
Yes, this is Joanne Suda from New City. Thank you, Dr. Carter. Thank you for sharing the information. We all want to be in compliance. We all want equity and the best education for our students.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a process for reporting this to administration? You're talking about violations that are coming to you and lack of compliance.
Basically, I cannot report because I am just the PAC president. What I do is take the information and I work with the parent. So let's say the child is dysregulated and the child is suspended, okay? And no one accessed the child's building plan. So the first step from there is to talk to the assistant principal or the principal of the school. Here's the thing. This is what happens. Well, it's the principal and assistant principal who suspended the child, correct? Yes. So, but if you have no idea that this child is an SSD student, if you have no idea what that child dysregulation plan is, and you're not following the plan, then you're out of compliance because that is a part of their IEP. Their building plan is a part of their IEP. And so let's say the child is least restrictive environment is a self-contained classroom, but your district doesn't have any self-contained classrooms. Everyone is in the classroom cross-categorical. But that's not that child's least restrictive environment. So now we're looking at snatching hairs. So your district does not provide this, but this is this child's home district. What are you going to do for that child? That child cannot have an all-day para support. So how are we going to meet the needs of this child? So it's not, oh, we do one or two things, we're out of compliance. What it is that parents are realizing that their children are not being serviced by the partnering district. You have a dual role IEPs. Oftentimes, and Rob, you can chime in if you would like, oftentimes with the IEPs, and Rob was in this particular meeting, no one who knew the child was in the IEP meeting. So how can you develop an IEP for a child that you have no clue about? That's inequitable. Rob, would you like to say anything about that? Rob Eaton.
Sorry, I was trying to find the unmute button. Sorry about that. So the one that she's referring to that I was sitting in, a child had been suspended and nobody sitting there knew anything about that child. When it came time for IEP or when it came time for a meeting, the principal, the assistant principal, the counselor, they all were too busy to attend an IEP meeting. So they just kind of blew it off. Nobody showed up. So we decided to postpone that IEP meeting. We postponed that IEP meeting, asked for a continuance. Next meeting came up. Again, everybody blew it off. Nobody wanted to show up. However, then they told the parent, you're just about on your time up. We're going to have to accept this IEP as it is. So when the parents can't get the people from the school district to sit down at the table and have some open conversations, it starts to really cause some some issues with them in regards to their compliance, in regards to the welfare of their child.
Thank you. This is distressing information. So really, we encourage you to ask your parents to come forward to administration to address these violations.
We are doing that this year. Yes, ma'am.
Very good. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Any additional questions for Dr. Carter?
Yes, ma'am, we will. But it's not your district. It's other districts. Madam President.
Okay, because as a parent of an SSD person, I lived a similar experience to that, and I will clown.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, hearing no further questions, thank you so much, Dr. Carter, for that information. And I'm sure that we all will reach out and make sure that if we have any of those situations, we will press them forward. The next item on the agenda is the Public Review Committee. Rita, can you pull up that report? Or sorry, Mark. So I had the pleasure of serving on the 2021-2022 Public Review Committee. And this is our final report. You all have seen the complete report that was in our packet. Next slide, please. I would first like to introduce the members of the 2021 Public Review Committee team, as well as give them a tremendous amount of thanks. This process is almost a year-long deep dive into the special school district in every aspect. And representatives from the Governing Council, Parent Advisory Committee, as well as appointees from DESE were part of this process. The Governing Council members were myself and Larry Felton, who were served as co-chairs, as well as Dr. Sheila Powell Walker. The Parent Advisory Committee members were Dr. Kamisha Carter, Rob Eaton, and Erica Williams. And then the DESE appointees were Dr. Jenny Bender, Dr. Andrew Stewart, and Dr. Mary Ann Tegens. Next slide, please. You can look at all of the areas that we reviewed and submitted recommendations, which include equity, the partnership agreement, continuous improvement, relationships, career and technical education, and North and South Tech, conflict resolution, post-secondary outcomes, personnel, communication, governance, and finances. Next slide, please. The changes that were made with regard to relationships, we combined relationships and communication, and then conflict resolution was eliminated from this set of recommendations from the previous recommendations. Next slide. Our final recommendations, as you can see on this last list, were 11, and they include the same list as you see on the screen. Next slide, please. By the numbers, for this PRC, there were 20 meetings held. 17 were held in person. 3 of them were on Zoom. We met with 5 organizations, including the Parent Advisory Council twice, the Board of Education, the Governing Council, which we are having tonight, North Tech, SSD superintendents, and our first meeting began on August 26, 2021, and we didn't wrap up until June 13th of 2022. Next slide, please. We received 13 different presentations from staff of the special school district, including the partnership, and these are the topics that we received presentations on: the partnership agreement, human resources, transition services, the strategic plan update, the 5-year equity plan, employee engagement, COVID-19 and the impact on special school district, the strategic plan and CSIP, career and technical ed overview, parent and diversity awareness, and the budget, as well as SSD local compliance plan and general assurance document. As PETA, and you see the highlight that PETA is now referred to as the family and community engagement. Next slide, please. We also had presentations to the SSD Board of Education on June 28th. as well as the governing council presentation, which is tonight. This is the working model that we utilize, and Larry, feel free to jump in if anytime, that we work from to show how the interactions between the organizations that are designed to give governance to special school district interact. As you can see, overarching is equity and advocacy, as well as compliance and customer satisfaction. Next slide, please. In the 2021, we amended that working model to just highlight overarching compliance and advocacy. And we changed the delivery of service, listed 3 main services. You can see the interaction arrows apply to all services, and compliance and advocacy apply to all. And equity is the capstone to all of our roles, with customer satisfaction now being the baseline.
And I think the important thing here is to show the importance of equity and customer satisfaction, because those were 2 of the things that came up in almost everything we discussed, is the ability to make sure we're doing it right for everyone, and to be able to see how, from a process improvement perspective, how well we've done it.
Next slide, please. So with regards to our first recommendation category in equity, we will continue implementation of the 8 objectives of the 2018 Blueprint for Equity and the Guiding Principles Action Plans for the 2020 Equity Framework. Monitor the framework's training schedule, and use feedback from participants to provide continuous improvement in the training, as well as follow-up activities designed to increase fidelity of equity in action. And I lost my screen. And the partnership agreement should identify the joint equity responsibilities of SSD and the partner district. Next slide, please. The recommended actions under equity are to establish a process for recording progress to institutionalize equity. This process will be a continuous set of repeating events, not just a single event. So equity is not something that can be achieved and checked off the box. We will define indicators and measurements that will be used to determine progress, and equity should be a consideration in all recommendations made in the 2021 PRC report. A standard definition of equity and standard set of considerations should be included in the partnership agreement, and equity should be a consideration in all decisions. Next slide. Our second recommendation was with regards to the partnership agreement. To implement and evaluate outcomes of the partnership agreement across 22 districts, the 22 partner districts, using the document assessment tool, including attention to as evidenced by metrics. The individual partnership agreement between SSD and a partner district should be discussed and adopted during an open board meeting. The agreement should be signed by both the superintendent and board president from both SSD and the partner district. We will continue the use of advisory committees, liaisons, etc., to provide transparent communication regarding the partnership agreement items, outcomes, and next steps. So all of us representing the 22 partner districts should be seeing a copy of the partnership agreement to sign off on, especially if you are a board president. If you are not, you should be asking that question of your superintendent and board president. Next slide. The recommended actions are a complete assessment and evaluation of the prior year's fulfillment of the partnership agreement to be completed and documented. This should include fulfillment of IEPs, attendance, disciplinary action, and any additional pertinent information. This information should be utilized as feedback to direct the development of a partnership agreement and any modifications. So the full set of SSD special education services governing documents must be in alignment, which includes the assurance document and the partnership agreement. The delivery of the most recent versions of both documents should be to both the partner district superintendent and the partner district's Board of Education president. The current 2022 education partnership agreement document should be modified to meet the recommendations made made in this section. So again, you should be looking for these agreements. This should be a agenda item on our individual board meetings. Next slide. With regards to continuous improvement, to develop continuous improvement methods to address processes, identify measures, gather data, analyze and publish results, and implement improvements in all areas addressed in the recommendations. These include equity, partnership agreement, career and technical education, post-secondary outcomes, personnel, governance, and finances. Next slide. Recommendations 4 and 9 were combined, and that's relationships and communication. And that was to establish specific planned meetings between families, partner districts, and SSD to improve communication and the exchange of status and information. The SSD Board of Education and Partner Districts Board of Education representatives should meet on a regular basis to provide the SSD board feedback on SSD services, communication, and priorities. I want to pause right here just to say that this has already gone into effect and will take place even later tonight. And this has never been something that has taken place. So there has never really been interaction between the SSD Board of Education and the governing council members that represent the partner districts. So I would like to thank Dr. Keenan for moving so quickly to establish these goals, and the same for having a leadership council that includes the 3 governing bodies for special school district, which include the governing council, the Board of Education, and the Parent Advisory Council. So families, partner districts, and SSD need to develop a common set of advocacy priorities for use in meetings with public officials and legislators, and evaluate the effectiveness of our communication tools used to engage and seek feedback from stakeholders regarding their experiences with SSD staff and any suggestions or concerns they might have. Next slide. The recommended actions. The SSD tech schools should be recognized in the SSD data reports as distinct institutions because of their very different missions as compared to the other SSD schools. So both North Tech and South Tech should be identified as career and technical education schools and not just lumped under the special school district, special education schools. We also provide quarterly listening sessions for families to communicate with SSD and partner district administrators, so that any concerns or challenges that allow for the expression of opinions of systemic challenges with SSD personnel in either the SSD school and or the partner district school. Provide timely communications between families and SSD staff members to ensure the proper SSD personnel have been identified by all pertinent stakeholders. An example of this is case managers, nurses, paraprofessionals, etc. To provide families copies and further explanation where applicable of all of the following: IEPs, progress reports, reevaluation documents, manifestation records, building plans, and bus plans. To contact families using email and phone to ensure personable contact, or follow the appropriate steps to ensure the appropriate level of communication has been received with all families. And lastly, direct case managers to provide all pertinent information within the first 2 weeks of the school year. Next slide. The recommendations with regards to governance: the members of the SSD Board of Education should conduct at a minimum an annual meeting with all partner district board presidents or their designated representatives. The purpose is to ensure that the SSD and partners boards have a planned opportunity to discuss issues, concerns, and priorities. And under advocacy, case managers are in the best position to advocate for the needs of their students. Next slide. Recommendation 5 deals specifically with career and technical education at North and South Tech. And North and South Tech, again, should be recognized and supported by internal and external stakeholders as unique and distinctly different institutions operating within special school district, fulfilling the critical and economically important mission of developing the future workforce of our region by educating and training eligible high school and adult learners, both able and disabled, in occupations labeled high demand by governmental authorities. Next slide. Those recommendations include that the SSD tech schools should be recognized in the SSD data reports as distinct institutions because of their very different missions as compared to the other SSD schools. North Tech and South Tech should continue to strive to make their schools available to qualified students with and without disabilities. Skills USA is the recognized career and technical student organization for North Tech and South Tech. Data show that student engagement in Skills USA has waned over the past few years, partly from the pandemic, but also from a lack of instructors willing to sponsor the CTSO because of a change in SSD's extra stipend policy. North Tech and South Tech should develop goals with actionable strategies and steps for successfully recruiting underrepresented and underserved populations for admission in their respective programs. North Tech and South Tech should continue to strive to offer the same career and technical education program opportunities for all qualified students and should demand, not warrant, a program at one school. Transportation be offered for students to attend the school where the program is offered. Next slide. Recommendation 6 deals with conflict resolution. A conflict resolution recommendation was listed in the initial set of recommendations developed by the PRC. Based on the group's discussions, this suggested recommendation is set aside. Conflict resolution is an important part of communication between SSD representatives and partner district representatives. This process is important in providing services to students. The PRC decided that a recommendation was not needed at this time. Next slide. Post-secondary outcomes. Support the proactive use of the IEP transition process to inform both families and staff of the individual students' goals and needs to successfully transition from K through 12 to post-secondary opportunities and outcomes. Next slide. The recommended actions for post-secondary outcomes are that the SSD tech schools should be recognized in the SSD data reports as distinct institutions because of their very different missions as compared to other schools. Define and establish a master set of metrics and measurements to be used for resource allocation. During the annual IEP, assess and revise the transition plan based on students' current interests, skills, and needs to ensure continued progress toward post-secondary success. Increase awareness and fully implement the charting life course process to support students and families in planning for the future. And increase efforts to directly communicate information, resources, and program options to families to enable students to prepare for successful transition. Improve effectiveness by evaluating and acting upon feedback. Next slide. The personnel recommendations. Examine the hiring and retention of the SSD workforce, including the interview, training, and review of employees. The interview process should include the timely communication with job candidates, establish an annual summary regarding hiring and retention with an emphasis on equity, focus on the following metrics: measures of job performance, job retention, as well as reasons for leaving and voluntary resignations. Employee feedback and job performance evaluation should be used as a means to promote change and improvement in an employee. Examine the onboarding process of SSD employees at SSD schools and at partner schools and measure client and employee satisfaction. Review and revise current and new job descriptions considering current industry job board formats to include relevant language and terminology. Use the job description for job board postings, job fairs, and interviews. Next slide. The recommended actions are to expand the outreach for new candidates, focus on climate and culture for new employees, establishing a mentor for each new employee. Regularly scheduled feedback and discussion sessions should be established, suggested to be quarterly. Consider whether salaries are competitive. A number of districts have recently approved an increase in salaries to ensure that all employees are at least making $15 an hour. Review and modify as needed staff recognition practices. Consider partnering with area vendors to offer free or discounted incentives for employees of SSD. Review possible benefits for employees such as staff wellness days, massages, professional development, and the use of use the results of regular climate surveys to inform both human resources and supervisory actions and supports for the staff. Next slide. And again, recommendation 9, communication, was combined with recommendation 4, relationships. Next slide. Governance. Improve the effective communication of the SSD Governing Council, Parent Advisory Council, and the SSD Board of Education by creating opportunities for these organizations to meet and exchange information on a regular basis. Next slide. The recommended action, again, to establish a leadership council, which will meet on, we had a pre-planning meeting and we'll meet on this evening. Increase the number of governing council meetings, coordinated advocacy plan, governing council member requirements, which is that during our discussions, we decided that it's not fair for new board members in their first year of their first term to be a member of the governing council. That is something that only the governing council can put into place. The SSD Board of Education cannot make that recommendation for us, but it is a disadvantage to a new board member to be part of the governing council and basically learning 2 systems in their first year as a school board member, as well as to increase communication between teams. Next slide, please. Recommendation 11 deals with finances, to continue the process used to ensure the SSD Board of Education and the Governing Council have a sound understanding of the assumptions and methodology used to create the annual SSD budget for approval. Continue to improve the financial quality and integrity associated with the budget by conducting annual reviews of the SSD operating budget by the Board of Education and Governing Council and by external auditors. Continue to develop a 5-year strategic projection of revenue, expenses, program expenditures, and balances. Next slide. The recommended actions are to define and establish a master set of metrics and measurements to be used for resource allocation, include equity considerations in the resource allocation process, allocate funding for personnel to meet established metrics and measurement, ensure tier definitions and tier allocation processes are consistent with the master set of metrics and measurements, identify the impact of the state fully funded transportation, and based upon current budget balance trends, set a minimum and optimum level for budget balances. Next slide. Any closing comments? Larry, do you want to jump in? I, again, just thank the team. We met for a long time. And we almost felt like family instead of committee members. So I just would like to thank everyone for their participation and recognize again all of the members and their time.
I'd like to make a couple of comments if I may. I'd like to tip my hat to both Rita and Dr. Pendergrass for all the work they put in, and I think especially Wendy, who gave us insight, gave us latitude, and gave us information, and Rita, who did everything, especially with the pandemic and everything else we went through. She was a saint. I can't say enough for her. I think from looking at the whole process, it's obvious that equity was our driver. I think that was the most important thing we talked about. And I think the other messages that came out, and you'll see it in all the recommendations, is we need to talk to each other more. We need to get our 3 viewpoints together rather than just having 3 viewpoints. The leadership team is a good start. I think the crossover of status reports and information to other meetings is equally important. The other thing is, I think advocacy is important, and I'll mention that because I'm doing some work for MSBA to try and figure out better ways to have advocacy that represents each school district and gives them a better avenue to talk with legislators. So I am just tickled to death with the team I got to work with this time. I've done this 3 times. The first time, I don't think we knew what we were doing. The second time, I thought there was a little too much contention. I can't say enough for this team, for the ability of ideas to be surfaced and people to listen. And this was a good product. And I have to tip my hat to Keisha, because she held this all together while I was trying to do spreadsheets and do everything else I could to kind of put ideas out. But Keisha was really the anchor that pulled this all together. So it's kind of been my pleasure. This is kind of my exit interview. So it's been a pleasure to serve.
And thank you, Larry. I would just like to also give kudos to you. Larry retired from the Melville board during this process, and all of the work that you have given to the students of both Melville and Special School District is tremendous. This is my second time serving on the PRC, so I don't look for a 3, and you won't see me trying to beat you with that. But it's a lot of work. But it really is. I encourage each and every one of you to read through the report. We looked at everything, and we really put some intentional pieces in place to make sure that the students of Special School District, as well as in our partner districts, receive the best possible education that they can get. And if there are did anyone have any questions?
I have a question, if I could.
Sure.
This is Hopper Parkway. How will the PRC report get disseminated to the various groups that need to take action here? So all the recommendations that are being made with personnel, the partnership agreement, equity issues, et cetera. How is this now a public document that anybody can access on the website, for one thing? And then second of all, how are we going to know that this is being acted upon?
Sure. Yes, it is a public document. It is on the website. The previous versions are also on the website, so you can kind of see the transition of thoughts. And in terms of how you will see the action items, each one of us have a responsibility to take it back to our districts, to our superintendents, to our other board members. I think Special School District, through Dr. Keenan's leadership, has already begun to take some action on some of the items. Like I said, we've never had interaction between the Governing Council and the Board of Education. It just has not occurred. We all have operated in absentia of one another. And the same could be said for the Parent Advisory Council. We are beginning to have those conversations. So I think that is the start. We also will receive updates on the Public Review Committee recommendations during our meetings. So this is not just a static document to sit on the shelf.
Will each school district be receiving a copy of this, each partner district?
I'm not sure how that was disseminated to the partner districts, but each one of us on this call has one in your board packet. So again, I encourage you to take it back to your districts, have those conversations. I have definitely shared it with my board, as well as my superintendent, so that they can be aware of what the expectations are for all of us.
And Keisha, I'd like to respond to that. Sure. We are going to be updating this at each board governing council meeting. So just like we did last year, I don't think that ever happened before with the updates on it previously. But we are going to make sure, like even tonight, we're going to be talking about the action plan that we've already put into place. It is a 4-year document. So please make sure that, when you bring these boards, that there are and understanding that these things are going to be progressing throughout the next 4 years. But we are going to make sure that we are committed to updating to the board and creating the documents to make sure that we're capturing what is actually being finalized with the project and with the recommendations, and then what is continued to be worked upon over the next couple of years.
Hi, this is Lynn. At one of the beginning slides, there was a reference to SSD superintendents as far as being one of the groups that had communication with the team. Can you define SSD superintendents?
It really wasn't SSD superintendents, but it is the regional superintendents group that meets throughout. It's all the superintendents that make up the partner districts.
Okay.
So that may have been a typo. I apologize.
I made that assumption, but I just wanted to make sure.
One more question that I have under recommendation 3 about the partnership agreements. There was reference made to assessing the prior year's partnership agreement and looking at metrics, et cetera. Who does that evaluation? Is that something that our administration does? Is that something our boards are supposed to be doing?
What they do at the end of the year is the liaison and the director of each district goes over this with their superintendents. So they will go through each one of the recommendations on the partner districts agreements. They've got it all laid out in terms of what are we looking for in terms of quality indicators, and then they review that at the end of each year. So generally between May and June, they are reviewing that. They did this list that they started doing this last year, and we are just doing right now all of the goal meetings, which each one of the partner district superintendents, liaisons, director of special ed, and Chiquita McRiddle, the chief of partner districts, and the executive director, Tammy Yates, and I are all meeting individually with each one of the different superintendents and their teams, and we're going through the partner district agreement, and we're going through each piece of it, and we're talking about what the goals are, what are the focus areas, we're talking about space, we're talking about technology, we're talking about our PACs, and which districts have PACs, and what we're doing to try to get our families to have more engagement. So we're individually meeting with each one of them. We've met with them already, 8 of the districts already this year, and we're going to complete all of them by the middle of October. So Debbie, we just met with Parkway, and so they're all ready to go to be presenting the partnership agreement to you and your board at the next board meeting. So, but we're reviewing all of them with every one of the districts and individually understanding what the goals are together to achieve the partnership agreement. And then each one of the districts, as the superintendents are having the directors present the partnership agreement to each one of the boards. And some boards are just going over it separately.
Yeah. Thank you.
Are there any additional questions?
Keisha, there's not a question, but I did want to say one thing. Dr. Keenan just mentioned that they are meeting with the districts and talking about PACs. So one of the things that the PAC is doing this year, my name's Rob, I'm the vice president. One of the things we're doing is putting a big effort into being sure we get PACs into all of the partnering districts. So we have began a mentoring program to help mentor some of those other districts that don't have people. Here's things that we've seen that work. Here's things that need to improve. Here's things that, so we're working diligently with all the partner districts to try to get PACs in those areas and giving them as much support that we as PAC can give to them. So I wanted to get that out there also, that's something we started this year.
Thank you
for that update.
And Rob, can I make a comment too around that? Because we've been talking about that with each one of the superintendents. I just want to, when we talk about this with them, we're talking about the efforts we're trying to engage with our PACs, because even some of our PACs have presidents and now the presidents are going off or they've moved. And so they've had to reestablish their PACs. Our directors and coordinators are engaging with that. We want to make sure that if we can't get a pack, because some of our districts, some of our smaller districts just don't have that level of engagement that, families want to commit to having a pack and meetings. So they're trying to get them to think about, well, what if we did a night with special education information and having our FACE group there, our family and community engagement. We're trying to get them to get some activity, some just overall, having the charting the life course, getting them used to information around IEPs, but trying to engage them so that they will, if they don't have a pack, that at least we're giving our families information, and we're kind of coupling it with larger things that are going on in each school or school district. So if they're having a parent night, having a table there, having people have information, or having different breakout sessions for people to go to. So we're trying to be very creative. So I just want people to, all of you on the governing council, to know that as we're talking with the superintendents, they're aware of which districts do not have packs, but it's also the families are just not wanting to engage. But we're thinking about different creative ways to be able to engage them and still have that information flow for them.
Does anyone else have any additional questions or comments? Okay, thank you. Hearing none, we'll move on. It's good to see my fellow PRC members online today. I miss you. We spent so much time together. Dr. Keenan, I think you're up next with your superintendent's report.
Yes, I am. And Mark, you want to pull up the slides? I do want to thank all of the PRC members. It was a huge commitment. But at the same time, the amount of information that we have received really confirmed a lot of the things that we're doing and reaffirmed it, but also gave us some really good ideas and suggestions on how we can continue to be more and more effective as a entity that supports not only the partner districts, but our own SSD schools and our CTE and college and career technical programming. And I think that the PRC did a great job of really laying that information out. So in this presentation, we are going to have our update not only on what we've done so far, but what we're going to do over this next year in terms of the measuring the goals within each one of the areas that they made their recommendations. I am a person who is like, you don't put an action plan together and do nothing with it. You do it and you take the advice of the people who really put a lot of effort into it. And then we're going to walk all of you through again, the partnership agreement, the early childhood initiative pieces, and the assurances, because all of these are coming to the boards. A lot of you might have already seen some. We're already starting to see some of our partnership agreements signed and sent back to us. But some of them are going to the boards over the next couple of weeks. And so we just want you to be aware of those pieces. Before we go into the full presentation, and we'll thank everybody for providing us with the information. Tonight's meeting is, and our president, Keisha Lee, had talked about this. We are going to end our meeting at the very end, and then we're going to go into breakout rooms. What that means is we're going to close the meeting and we'll be no longer an official meeting at that time, but we're going to go into breakout rooms for about 10 minutes with each one of you to participate. So we'll have an SSD board member who's over the sub-districts, and then we'll have the governing council members in there. And it's a topic, it's a free topic for you to discuss. We did send out to everybody your one-page information about your district. So it talks about all the disability categories, the amount of students in each area, talks about the number of staff. It talks about all this information that we felt that you needed. And if you have any questions on that, please use that information. Please talk to our SSD board members about any questions that they can bring back to us, to me and to the leadership team. So we're going to start doing that tonight. There is no violation of open meetings because there's not a quorum in any one of these breakout rooms. We just couldn't stream all of them all at the same time. But I think that we're going to try this out this first time and see how it goes. And when we meet with the leadership, the PRC leadership meeting in October or November, we'll kind of discuss how this went and the format, and to see if we can increase that piece of it too. And then one more thing, for me, it's important for us to make sure that we're honoring, all the different entities of not only the governorship or the overall policy pieces of SSD, but how do we make sure that we are connecting with each one of our partner districts? So we meet with our SSD board twice a month most times. We have our policy committee. We do our governing council meetings 4 times a year. We're adding in 4 more governing council meetings, which are the leadership council meetings. We also are supporting the superintendents with 3 individual meetings. So we're meeting with them now about the goals, talking about the budgets in February and January. And then in May, we're going to be talking about the end of the year goals. So we're going to make sure that we are connecting with all of our districts and making sure that we're taking the broader pieces. And also, excuse me, the broader pieces, and then we're making sure that we're individualizing it, but keeping those guardrails on what are the overall expectations to support them. So just wanted to kind of touch base on that. And I'm going to turn it over to Wendy so she can start moving into the overall PRC recommendations.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Keenan. Next slide, please. So we have, based on and thank you very much for the comments. It was my pleasure working and being able to report back to the cabinet and DLT and Dr. Keenan, all of the hard work that was happening in PRC. We are taking that information and we are moving on as follows. Next slide. So as Ms. Lee stole all my thunder, that was the Public Review Committee. Next slide. The 10-11 recommendations were taken, and next slide, please, moved into what is considered an action plan for the years 22 through 26. So on the next couple of slides are going to be the recommendations that were just gone through, but you'll also find that there are recommendation champions that will be responsible for filling out all of the action steps, the responsibilities, the timelines, being able to chart the actions that we are taking, that we are accomplishing, and that the actions are going to move forward and take multiple years to complete. So the next several slides, if you would go through them, Mark. Dr. Macklin is recommendation 1. Next slide. Chiquita McRiddle is recommendation 2 for partnership agreements. Next slide. Dr. Molly Bolton is working on continuous improvement. Next slide. We will be, myself and Jen Henry will be splitting the relationship and communications recommendations. Next slide. Kevin Ander will take our recommendation for career and technical education. Next slide. Dr. Kelly Grigsby will work with post-secondary outcomes. Next slide. Mr. Philip Boyd will take on our personnel recommendations. Next slide. Dr. Keenan will work on governance. And the final slide will be Dr. Hogg, our Chief Officer for Finance, that will take on all of our finance recommendations. Any questions? Thank you very much. Next slide, please. Ms. McRiddle.
Thank you, Wendy, for that introduction, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to present to you our leadership focus for the 2022-23 school year from partner districts. I am Chiquita McRiddle, Chief Officer of Partner Districts, and I serve in this leadership role with support from Dr. Tammy Yates, the Executive Director of Partner Districts. Next slide. Our goal this year is to ensure that we provide leadership to each partner district and to ensure that we are supporting with ensuring that there is effective leadership and that we are supporting all of our stakeholders and that we have a clear mission, that we are engaging in open and effective conversations with all of our stakeholders, but that we also use quality improvement principles to improve our processes. We want to ensure that we set direction with stakeholders for planning purposes. And we've had a few of those conversations tonight that has been shared with you from both Dr. Kamisha Carter, as well as the PRC committee, Keisha Lee, as well as Dr. Keenan. And we want to ensure that we are providing those opportunities to capture voices of our stakeholders as we make decisions in each of our partner districts. And that does include us establishing priorities, ensuring that we are building positive relationships with everyone, that we have tools to monitor our expectations and that they are data-driven, and that there are opportunities also for staff growth and well-being, and that we are developing and utilizing a fiscally sound and an instructionally aligned budget. Next slide. And so our goals for this year, next slide, is to ensure that we work in collaboration. This is our purpose, to ensure that we work in collaboration with partner district leadership and that we are providing equitable services throughout St. Louis County. As Keisha Lee indicated, not just ensuring that we have equity in our language, but how is it in our action? What does it look like in our day-to-day efforts and our work to ensure that we are providing effective services throughout St. Louis County and serving our students? Next slide. And so Dr. Keenan shared with you that we have started our tour of St. Louis County, meeting with each of our partner districts. And during these conversations, our directors are leading us in efforts in each of the areas that you see before you. What are some of those partnership agreement updates? And so there was a question about the metrics and how do we measure? How do we have those conversations? And so we have our baseline data information that was developed at the end of the 21-22 school year. And this is an opportunity for us to identify those areas of focus, as well as to highlight some of those strengths within the partnership agreement that we've done well in. We want to ensure that we maintain focus on those areas, that we are having collaborative conversations, and that we're making those decisions about those areas in which we may need to grow and improve collectively, and that information is transparent and shared with each of our school boards. Our administrative assignments are shared. We want to ensure, as Dr. Carter stated, that we know, and as well as our superintendents and partner district leadership teams know, what administrators are assigned to each building, how they are supporting the school teams, how they are connected to the school teams, and to ensure that they are considered a part of those teams. And we had these conversations to occur as well this summer during our first principal leadership academy that took place and allowed us to engage with principals throughout St. Louis County, as well as other school and district level leaders to talk about some of those expectations. We have our new administrator evaluation tool, and what we are ensuring is that each of our special education directors assigned to each district, each partner district, they have a responsibility at the end of the year to provide information to the superintendent in regards to how they evaluate themselves, that self-evaluation, and to share that information with the partner district superintendent for opportunities to reflect, but opportunities to receive input and feedback to support them in developing their goals for the upcoming school year. We have placed a major focus on our employee engagement survey, and we want to ensure that our directors use this as a piece and a tool to ensure that we are, number one, identifying what our staff in each of our partner districts share with us as areas of opportunity to improve climates and to ensure that we are monitoring those pieces. And so one of the initiatives that we've added this year is to ensure that we develop a climate goal for each partner district to ensure that there is oversight and that we continue to focus on those areas and continue to engage in conversations to support creating healthy school climates throughout St. Louis County. We wanted to provide to each of our district staff updates so that they are aware of where vacancies may exist, where new staff may exist, and if there is a need for us to talk about any additional staffing supports that may be needed. We do the same thing with each of our divisions throughout special school district, providing updates from teaching and learning, student services, technology, and transportation as it relates to that specific district. Are there any talking points that we need to address and cover? Are there any areas that we see as highlights, but at the same time, opportunities of support as well as growth? We focused a lot this year on teacher workload to ensure that the workload consists of first and foremost providing service to our students and how we provide those services, the instructional delivery and those particular pieces, and to ensure that we're not giving busy work and duplications of work that we may be able to retrieve from other outlets instead of engaging staff in unnecessary responsibilities. We have streamlined the safe schools training in both partner districts as well as with special school district. Our staff are required to complete these trainings. And so we wanted, again, to look at what is duplicated and what can we remove to allow our teachers not to spend unnecessary time completing these trainings. With our leadership in each of the partner districts, we talk about the space allocation. This was one of those pieces that Dr. Carter spoke to tonight, and we are stressing the importance as well to ensure that our partner district leadership understand that space allocation is extremely important when we're talking about one of our vulnerable groups of students that we must service. And we want to ensure that when we are supporting students in their home schools and districts, that number one, our partner districts understand that we are service providers and that we are partners in providing services and instruction, and that we must both be on the same page to ensure that we're providing those services in a welcoming environment that supports the need that our students may require and the space at the same time. With disproportionality, we are having our partner district liaisons to present updates and status of their goals to us. This is an area where each partner district is responsible for that oversight of disproportionality. Understanding that special school district is the funding source. We are not the oversight district, but we are partners in the conversation to ensure that there is guidance and that everyone understands the expectations, and to help them to create and establish those goals, but to have those ongoing conversations to support them. We've heard very loud and clear from our Parent Advisory Council, as well as many of our parents, that they wanted us to really focus on increasing our forms of communication. And so with that, we want to ensure that we're transparent with each of our partner districts, the superintendents and leadership teams, for them to understand how we communicate on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, at the start of the year, and during necessary times throughout the year. With the Parent Advisory Council, these are conversations that we're having with each partner district. And we do know that there will be some level of uniqueness throughout St. Louis County based upon each of the demographics of our partner districts. And we want to ensure that we support each of our school communities where they are, and helping them to establish healthy parent advisory councils that allows our families to advocate for student needs. And then again, I've already talked about how we have set goals with the climate and engagement, but our directors are also responsible for developing goals in literacy, numeracy, as well as social emotional. Next slide. Next slide. With the insurance documents, this is a document that was established in 1957, and the compliance plan was developed and it was submitted by SSD. And this set forth provisions by which SSD provides special education and related services to component school districts. The general assurance document, this assures that as to areas of the joint and separate compliance plan that are not contained within the compliance plan, and they should be addressed through joint ratification. And so this, the assurance document is required for it. You have to have approval of this, and it must be submitted to DESE each year. Next slide. The assurance document covers the following areas. These are critical areas to ensure that we are in compliance, of course, most importantly with providing services to all of our students, but that we have measures in place for child find to ensure that there are opportunities for us to identify students requiring services, but also oversight of the IEP, procedural safeguards, and some of those other factors that you see listed there as well too. Next slide. Next slide, service agreement with early childhood. What you see before you are service agreements as well as coalition districts. These are districts in which we support their efforts to provide early childhood services to students. And so to the right, you see coalition districts, and to the left, you see those same coalition districts are added to service agreements. Service agreements, you also see districts outside of St. Louis County. Coalitions are where we support with any service that they may not be able to provide. That's where the service agreement comes in. And at that point, we're able to provide those itinerant level services to support those districts that you have before you. Next slide. Partnership agreement. With the partnership agreement, we've talked about a few of those pieces. If you can transition to the next slide, please. This is where we want to ensure that we increase knowledge and awareness of expectations. We do use this tool to monitor the areas that you see before you that include staffing, instruction, collaboration between both districts, the programs and services that we offer, data and technology, and how we provide data sharing, but also addressing the technology needs of our students and staff in each of the partner districts, transportation, as well as career tech ed. And this really helps us to guide those conversations that we have with partner districts at a deeper level. Next slide. Since May of 2022, we have worked on the following areas. These categories included staffing. We added goals to this area under teaching and learning and accountability. We reviewed the standards and indicators progress and made some changes there. With collaboration of responsibilities and resources, we are ensuring that SSD admin are attending parent advisory council meetings and being active members to support our families and being present. With student services, we want to ensure that we're providing equitable services throughout the county. And in data and technology, we are focusing on equitable processes for tech resources. And so you do have the link in this presentation for you to review the updates to the new partnership agreement for this school year. Next slide. Again, here are some of those added components that we talked about under 2.8. This is where with the administrator performance review that I've talked about before, just ensuring that the superintendent is able to provide feedback and understanding that this is not evaluative. Next slide. Here, this is where we are focusing on the presentation to include an overview of the engagement survey, focus area and goals, and developing the climate and engagement goal. Next slide. We want to ensure that our coordinators and directors are participating in Parent Advisory Council. Next slide. And with the assessment and evaluation tool, this is to be completed each year. And again, this is where the partner district liaison, as well as the director of special education, they meet both in the fall and the spring of each year to ensure that there is ongoing collaboration and we continue to strengthen the partnership. Next slide. Once all of this is comprised, I'll talk a little bit about where we go with that evaluation piece in a second, but this is what we agree to. SSD and partner districts, we agree that we will endorse the vision and mission of the partnership agreement, that we support this as a collaboration and a shared responsibility. We understand that this is to guide our efforts to enable us to service each student, and that we will collaboratively come together to implement the principles of the agreement. Next slide. Additionally, we want to ensure that we receive signatures from the following individuals that you see listed. That includes superintendents for both the partner district as well as special school district, as well as the board president of each district as well too. Next slide. For this current year, we want to ensure that all of our partnership agreements for the 22-23 school year, that we receive them from each partner district by September 30th. We want to ensure that they are submitted to Dr. Keenan's office no later than October 31st after obtaining those signatures from school boards, and that we want to ensure that the current agreement for this year is finalized by June 30th of 2023. Many of the superintendents did share that based on their discretion, these may be provided through a work study or an open meeting, or through other outlets of how they communicate with their school boards, understanding that I do not have the authority to inform a board and or a superintendent of how they should deliver, but I can provide the expectations to them. And again, it is at their discretion of how they decide to share that information with their school boards. Next slide. With disproportionality, I'll give you a brief overview of where we are with that. And this again is just to provide transparency to our stakeholders and to ensure that we uphold those requirements as expected by DESE. Next slide. We want to ensure that we understand why disproportionality exists. And that is when students in a racial or ethnic group, they are more likely to be identified as a student with a disability, with a particular disability. They are placed in a more restrictive setting and are suspended or expelled more than students in other or ethnic groups. Next slide. And so we have the comprehensive coordinated early intervention services, and you will hear this as CEIS or CCEIS. And this is where we have to set aside 15% of our IDEA Part B funds to support in this area. And this is a requirement that we support those LEAs that have been identified, and that they ensure that activities are in place to address those factors to ensure that we are addressing disproportionality. Next slide. We've talked about the 15% set aside, which is a federal requirement. We want to ensure that as the plans are developed in each district, that they are serving students in ages 3 through grade 12 and with and without disabilities. And they may not only just serve students who are receiving disabilities. Next slide. So one of our efforts to ensure that we are supporting throughout the county, and I think that this has been shared with you before from Dr. Hogue, our Chief Finance Officer, of how we support our districts throughout St. Louis County, looking at the tiered approach, Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. Tier 1 is where we support all of our districts. Tier 2, this is where we support those 11 districts that are identified as disproportionate. And then in Tier 3, we have 8 districts that we have identified as high need districts based on community data, as well as additional supports to ensure additional supports are provided, coaching, professional development, and extending conversations about how we can support with any additional resources and programming. Next slide. In this area, you will see the 11 districts that are identified as disproportionate. Next slide. Disproportionality, we've developed a framework to support partner districts throughout the county. We've talked about how we have those conversations at the start of the year, but we also have ongoing conversations throughout the year to ensure that we are supporting the individual districts in how they plan to address disproportionality. And we want to ensure that they understand the need when it's necessary to focus on those social emotional as well as interventions for literacy and numeracy. Next slide. What you have before you is just a brief overview of the 11 districts again, and how we are supporting them through funding. And so you will see that top number at the top, the $7.06 million. Those are the funds for this year. You will also see in this document that we look at the student population, the percent to allocate the disproportionality, and these funds are provided on a based upon the number of students attending those districts. That's how we're able to determine the percent. And so it is an equitable amount that is per pupil allocation. I do apologize, I don't have that number before me, and I can provide you that information if there is a need to do so. What you see listed, you may see the MTSS, this is our multi-tiered systems of supports. And so they may actually have personnel supporting in their district to support in these areas. You will also see teachers, paraprofessionals, interventionists, instructional coaches, speech and language pathologists, our school psychologists, behavioral interventionists, and social workers. So those are personnel pieces that they may have added to their plan to support. And with those remaining funds, most times those funds are used for additional resources within that school, as well as professional development opportunities for staff. Next slide. Additionally, with tier 3 districts, we support those districts again, based upon the community data that is available to us, taking a look at state assessments, local assessments, and other data outlets. How can we support with additional resources and materials that are within our means, but also some that are external as well. And then to ensure that there are opportunities for coaching in the areas that you see listed before you. Next slide. And so these are our tier 3 districts that we are supporting again. Next slide. Are there any questions?
This is Debbie Hopper. I have a couple of questions. Thank you, first of all, for the presentation. One of my questions is I noticed Parkway School District is not listed as one of the districts, either as a coalition district or another district involved with utilizing SSD for early learning services. And I was curious about that because I thought we did.
So a coalition district, those are districts that provide their own special education services, and we support their need. We do support Parkway with special education services.
But not as a coalition district?
Coalition districts provide their own early childhood program and services, and we support them where they're not able to provide those services.
But
so it's not under special school district.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So Debbie, that slide, it showed districts that we support separately, but it also showed the coalition. Parkway's a different one. You're a part of the SSD. We provide early childhood special education program to Parkway alongside with their in the early childhood programs.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. But that slide's just not relevant. That's
right.
Pertain to something else. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had one other question about coalition partnership agreement. Oh, I couldn't get the link. You said that there was a link to the partnership agreements on the one slide. I couldn't access it. It was some of the changes to the partnership agreements. Can we get that sent to us a different way?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. And then a comment was made, I guess, is it the expectation that the partnership agreement and the assurance document are supposed to be discussed during the school board meeting. And like, is the expectation that there be a presentation on this and then open discussion and then it'd be an individualized action item or just a consent agenda item?
It depends on the district. Like in Parkway, you will be having a formal presentation. Most of them are doing the presentations where our directors of special ed are presenting to the partner districts superintendents. We feel like that's a better way to make sure that everybody's aware of it. Just the information that you're getting tonight, it's going to be similar to like, what are you seeing in each one of the 22 districts? So we are highly encouraging that. Most of them are having the directors. That's why we developed that model of having a director in every district. And so the directors are presenting to the school boards in their home districts. And then that way we can make sure that they're fully aware of it and then they can vote on it if they want to.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. Sylvester Taylor, Hazelwood School District.
Go ahead.
How do you determine the different tiers for the schools?
So if you can go back to those slides, Mark, tier one, Mr. Taylor, that is what we do to support all school districts throughout St. Louis County. Tier two, those are districts that are identified as disproportionate based up on, if you can go back one more slide, one more, where basically the district may, to some extent, they may be identified as disproportionate. I think you need to go back one more slide again, due to these areas here, Mr. Taylor. So it could be a situation where within a district, there is a high number of students identified with a disability. There is a threshold set by the state of 3.5% of the population within a school district. And so looking at those metrics, that's how disproportionality is determined, looking at the indicators that you have before you. So that would be tier two.
Okay,
tier
thank
three,
you.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay, and then tier three are those districts again where we're looking at community data. And so we looked at a heat map and we really began to focus in on specific zip codes throughout St. Louis County based upon demographic data that was available to us to ensure that we were supporting any needs from there, but also looking at state performance data as well as local performance and assessment data, and determining how we can, in addition to tier one and tier two, support those high needs districts that are identified.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think the biggest thing around disproportionality, this was established by the federal government, and each state has to establish their criteria. So it's not like the state of Missouri just made these pieces up with it. And the biggest thing I think for people, for every district to know and understand is, even though the money's flowing through SSD, the plan and the funds go directly to the district to make sure that they're building that plan. It is to be used for students who are not in special education. And I think that's the biggest thing, is when we're presenting this information, the ownership around it is really back in the district to say, how can you use this funding to support your students in not in special ed, but students who are in the gen ed environment, so that we can help supporting students who are, to not suspend them as much. And that students are not being referred to special ed if we provide interventions for them. So really, this is money that we're providing back to the districts to make sure and to ensure that they're utilizing these funds for their gen ed. And I think that because there is this tendency to think, well, because SSD is presenting this information to everybody, that it's to be used for special education, and it is not. We have said for the last 3 years, this is to be used by your gen ed environment, build your plans, and then we'll be able to support you. And we're going to do the same thing again this year. We meet with all the districts in December and January to talk about their budget. and then we'll bring it back to the board, to the governing council. But that disproportionality funding is truly to be owned and built and to be shepherded into your gen ed environments.
Does anyone else have any questions?
Yes, I do. This is Joanne Suda, U City. Thanks for the presentation. On the budget slide, there's a column with blue numbers. I know you explained it, but I need to be reminded what those are. Could you remind us what those are?
On the budget slide, I would have to see the slide again. I'm sorry. Blue numbers, those blue numbers indicate additional funds, again, looking at some of those high needs districts and meeting with the district leadership and school teams to talk about other forms and outlets to support those particular districts. So that would be tier 3 supports.
Thank you.
And it would most likely include staffing that has been provided, additional from SSD to support. So if you see at the bottom with the SSD schools, that's one way that we're supporting throughout the entire county. And then when you see both Jennings and University City, those are additional funds, again, to support based upon the request and having those conversations with those partner districts to talk about other ways that we could support the district.
Thank you very much.
While we're on this slide, could you offer up an explanation on what comes first, the count to allocate or the percent to allocate?
So the count to allocate is going to be first, and then basically what you see is a percentage of that total amount. That district receives that percentage of the total amount of funds available, and it's based on per pupil allocation.
Okay, and then, so the count to allocate, the number of pupils that are in there, that's the number of students being served by SSD in Parkway, for example?
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any additional questions? Okay, our next agenda item is the calendar of events. Just to review, oh, where did it go? Gosh. Yeah, thank you, Rita. Our next meeting is scheduled for December the 5th, where we will discuss the revised budget and also have an update to the CSIP and the 5-year rolling plan. And then March the 6th will be the election of Board of Education members and also review of the preliminary budget and budget goals. And then June the 5th will be the approval of the budget, as well as the approval of the CSIP, reorganization of officers, and the governing council orientation for new members. And we have reached announcements. Does anyone have any announcements? Hearing none, can we get a motion to adjourn? But before we adjourn, please remember, do not exit. You will be given an assignment to a breakout room to meet with your Board of Education representative. So just remember, don't log off, don't leave. We'll have
not all of the SSD members are on here, so I will go into one of the breakout sessions just to kind of see how they're doing. And then Dr. Chiquita Meckler will also go into another one because we're missing 2 of our SSD board members.
Okay.
All right.
Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Thank you, Debbie. Can I get a second?
Second, Lynn.
Second, Lynn Mignette. Okay, can all those in favor say aye?
Aye.
Aye. Aye. And go into your breakout room. Don't log off. So we should be getting a notification.